Hello everyone, this is your everyday literature analysis with your one and only literature feed. Now, before I start this video, let me give you a warning. If you're here for a quick summary, this is not your jam. However, if you're going to attempt an exam and need a quick revision on the most important topics, we are on board together. So today's discussion is on Eugene Ionesco's Rhinoceros. Eugene Ionesco is a Romanian-born French dramatist. He is also known as the father of the theater of absurdity. Rhinoceros is a play by Eugene Ionesco written in 1959. The play has elements of absurd and avant-garde theater, but more significantly, the play provides a political commentary on the rise of mass hysteria, fascism, and totalitarianism. Written in the aftermath of the Second World War and with the backdrop of the rise of the Iron Guard in Romania, UNESCO uses the play and the symbol of the rhinoceros to showcase the fall of individuals to totalitarian regimes. Now, there are a lot of words that you might feel unfamiliar with, so let me make a quick detour from our discussion and give some simple explanations and definitions so that you can understand the core of our discussion better. Absurd, as you might know, is simply something that is illogical. From the context of the play, the fact that people are turning into rhinoceros is absurd. It is illogical, right? In a logical setting, no human being can turn into a rhinoceros. So, avant garde theater, also known as experimental theater, it is a form of drama that challenges the established norms of traditional theater or theatrical conventions. Okay, so it challenges, plot, character development, dialogue, staging, etc. and etc. Okay, it also explores themes such as uh, social and political issues, like a provocative themes, not just a simple theme, as you might know. Now, when we come to fascism, I'm sure you all know what fascism is. Fascism is in simple words, it's a dictatorial leadership. So, Nazism, as you might be familiar with, is a form of fascism. While fascism is a broader political ideology, Nazism is developed under Adolf Hitler. It incorporated key fascist elements, but also added its own unique characteristic like extreme racism and anti-Semitism, etc. Now, first of all, we are going to look into rhinoceros as a political allegory. So, what is a political allegory? A political allegory exposes and makes an argument about a political situation through a story that features symbolic characters and events. Okay, Rhinoceros undeniably has a very strong political context. This play is an attack on all totalitarian and conformist ideologies, including fascism and extreme forms of communism practiced by the Nazis in Germany, Mussolini in Italy, and by the Red Guards in Romania. UNESCO is against all types of ideologies, and he seems to be supporting the perception that communism, like fascism or any other ideology, like Nazism, is a variant of a totalitarian political philosophy and ideology which curbs and deters human freedom. In rhinoceros, totalitarianism is symbolized as a disease that manifests and mutates thoughtful human beings into barbaric, rhinoceroses. So, UNESCO here endeavors to attack all types of collective activity based on thoughtless action, and this attack transforms his play into a very strong political statement. Now, Rhinoceros is a political allegory because the story goes like this, where rhinoceros invade a town, and which stands as a symbol for Nazis and the spread of their influence. Some characters in the play transform into rhinos, just as some people become Nazis or influenced by Nazis. Other people try to argue that they should accept the rhinos. Still, some people, like Berenger, vote to fight them until the end. When the first rhinoceros arrives in the town, people are frightened and shocked. Like, why is there a rhino like in the middle of a town? Although one man, Berenger, is rather indifferent about that. His friend John tells him that he must have more willpower and improve himself to win the affection of his, girlfriend, Daisy. Notice how quickly people forget about the rhinoceros. Then another rhino hurries by, kills a cat. People are still shocked, but now they spend more time wondering if it's the same rhino or what breed the rhino is. They're already getting desensitized, right? Something quite similar happened when the Nazi regime took control. People were shocked at first, and then they ignored it and discussed it without much worry about it. As the play goes on, though, some people begin to deny the existence of the rhinos at all. It is merely a collective psychosis, one man says. And then a rhino crashes up the stairs of Berenger's office. It is his co-worker who has changed into a rhino. Allegorically, this refers to the co-worker becoming a Nazi. The co-worker's wife vows to remain with him. More and more rhinos appear throughout the town as more and more townspeople transform, just like more and more people joined Nazis as time went by. We can see that UNESCO's play is clearly a response to the corrupt ideologies that propelled during World War II and afterwards during the period of the Cold War. UNESCO exposes the hegemonic forces of ideologies that consciously or subconsciously transform people into mindless creatures when he employs and envisions these rhinos in the text. The rhinos are representative of the oppressed groups and the individuals who were forced to succumb to the collective hysteria which has precipitated by fascist and totalitarian ideologies. UNESCO, a troubled man of his times, had witnessed the fall of his kindred people into a pit of careless activity which rendered him senseless with no thoughts and opinions on their own. He watched the intellectual community succumb to ideological manipulation and ideological interpellation. This mindless allegiance among the masses, evoking their utmost devotion to any belief system without rational thought, disturbed him profoundly. And Rhinoceros, the play employing modern techniques of theater and avant garde styles of form, immersed in satire, was his response to depict and expose this inherent problem in the Western world. Now, UNESCO here explores multiple themes: conformity, cultural and mass movements, morality, and philosophy. It is not just totalitarianism of a particular variety, be it communism, fascism, or Nazism. The play is trying to depict, but it tries to make a larger statement on the dangers of extreme conformity to any form of political ideology. Rhinoceros makes this statement while construing a human response to baffling transmogrification, an ultimate grotesque transformation that is employed as a result or as a device to evoke curiosity and horror in the audience. The play gives the illusion of being rooted in an existentialist tradition, but is as much about the frivolousness and inanity of the human condition as it is about our historical capacity for cruelty and savagery as a race. UNESCO, though, UNESCO, through a bitter transformative satire, establishes the capacity of the human race to commit the paramount grotesque actions. Rhinoceros is permeated with animalistic groans, blows, and panicky and named human debility, showing us how it feels to have one's identity subverted and traduced. When a person morphs himself into a rhinoceros, he happily relinquishes his own personal beliefs, hopes, and aspirations in order to ascribe to a powerful collective. The play uses techniques of modern theater to complete these effects, which would have been impossible to generate without advanced sound systems and the manufacturing of theater props. Um, the rhinoceros mask was specially procured for this play, and the character's fictional transmogrification is only complete with the actor's physical change and the ground reality or the stage. The play carefully envisions and constructs incongruities, crafting the absurdity present in contemporary thought and politics. The result of this is a play whose unprecedented approach in itself is a tool that attacks the use of flawed logic and rationality, while at the same time attacking the ideologies or philosophical perspectives that only promote violence or mindless action, serving to hegemonize people. While the characters in the play are always speaking to each other, there is nothing resembling something of a communication between them. Each character within the play represents a deliberate fixture on the absurdist portrait of a society run amok. The protagonist, the best friend, the love interest, the co-workers, and the cafe personnel, each and every character is shown in a dilemma, and how these characters, when threaded together, resembles a portrait of a society which is flawed and suffering. The emphasis on race in the play expresses a strong disdain for fascism's pretensions to racial superiority, as the characters debate throughout the first act and try to categorize the rhinos as of Asian or African variety based on the number of horns they possess. One can sense the underlying current between the debate has to do with more than usual classification and categorization of the animals. The character who most closely imitates the course of fascism is Berenger's close friend John. John is a racist, revealing himself to be the kind of person who judges people by the color of their skin or in the play based on the number of horns they possess. Um, in a dialogue, if anybody's got horns, it's you Asiatic Mongol. This remark by John is highly racist and alludes to the common stereotype about the Jews being the horned men. The European supremacist mentality constructs the images of Jews who are anti-Semitic as the devils and demons. John has suffered at the hands of the society, and his job in the capitalist modernist world has robbed him of his individuality. This process in turn made him vulnerable, and he became a possible victim of totalitarian ideologies. Hegemony that aimed to stifle individual thinking, rationality, and consciousness. John here is symbolic of the entire functionaries of the state or the working class who are vulnerable and can easily fall under the spell of the fascist ideologies and beliefs that are dominant. John, like the endless masses of rhinos in the end, fell prey to such ideologies and joined the wave of fascist sympathy like a mindless puppet. UNESCO not only tries to make an attempt to attack social injustices and explores how civil society degrades under ideological pressure and hegemonic dominance solely through the dramatic form, but the play contains specific attacks on the rhetoric and the logic of Romanian Iron Guard. The Iron Guard based its philosophy on the idea that fascism was a form of natural law, under the rule of which the true Romanians will regain and reclaim their superiority over the inferior races which are sharing and inhabiting the same land as them. There was an intense and deep rooted desire within the psyche of the Romanians to distance themselves from the other barbaric races that shared their lands and lived among them. All these desires and the thoughts of being the superior race and the ideology of the Romanian Iron Guard are portrayed in the play through the character of John. Here we are Here we see how the society are bifurcated into two halves, where one was the superior one and the other inferior. This racial superiority can symbolically be understood by a Marxist point of view. We can fathom the fact that this division of the society into two classes, superiors, which can be understood as the bourgeoisie, the class which holds the control and owns the entire functionary of the state, and the inferiors, the proletariats, which comprised of the entire functionary of the state. The character of John in the play is symbolic of the entire working class, which is vulnerable because they are the lower ranking individuals within the society and are the comprising factors that have no identity of their own. This vulnerability of the entire working class made them prone to the conformist ideologies, and they readily fell under its spell. This symbolic hegemonization of the entire working class of the proletariats and their struggle to free themselves from this hegemony of the superior races and of the bourgeois is depicted by UNESCO in this play. Not only is UNESCO attacking fascism, political conformity, and totalitarianism in this play, he is also trying to attack the ideologies of the left, particularly in France. UNESCO here attempts a subtle attack on the French intellectuals who embraced communism to the point where they started endorsing Stalin and his ideologies in their works in the name of their communitarian values and their allegiance to communism. Botat, for example, is a character in the play who expresses himself in solidarity with the French communist counterparts. At the end of the play, Berenger screams, "Well, in spite of everything, I swear to you, I will never give in, never." For Berenger, the protagonist, remaining human when everyone else has transformed into Rhinoceros become a responsibility that he is the sole taker of. His addictive habit of drinking is the only thing that helps the process of inoculating himself from the loneliness, which is an inherent byproduct of this epidemic. The irony here is in the fact that both his friend John and his coworker Dudad chastise him for his habit of drinking, insinuating that Berenger's addiction and dependence on alcohol to help cool down his nerves reveal a lack of willpower and impulse control. But contrastingly, in the play, it is these two, not Berenger, who succumb readily to the mass psychology and ideology of the rhinoceritis. Though Berenger ironically escapes the human world through his drinking, in the end, he is the only character in the play who holds on tightly to his human identity. The fall of both Dudard and John is symbolic of the fall of the entire masses within Europe who succumbed to the mass ideology and gave no thought to their actions. The entire population of masses were blinded by the conformist and totalitarian ideologies and sympathies, making them prone to social evils like fascism and communism. Though in the play, the protagonist Berenger remains irresolute in his will, resisting the crushing tide of hegemony with the force of humanity. UNESCO takes note of the fact that all things considered, one needs the power and friends of other to immunize and invulnerable oneself from social confinement and depression. An individual human who exists outside the group is less immune and has no or an exceptionally minuscule personality and identity, making him or her subsequently helpless against the assault of conformist um, totalitarian perspectives and belief systems. So Berenger in Rhinoceros is resistance against the world. He is symbolic of the entire humanity, refusing to succumb to the grotesque epidemic of rhinoceritis. Berenger as an individual is flawed but admirably courageous in his celebration of selfhood in defense of conformism or totalitarianism. Berenger stands alone as a rejecting slogan against the mass production and dominance of one ideology and purposefully avoids labeling himself into one specific group. Berenger's ignorance of all things political and inability to hold stubbornly to one mode of thinking allow him to remain human. Berenger battles various ideologies present within his society and comes to the conclusion that he cannot discipline himself to anything. Berenger's humanity, UNESCO implies to be, is the notion of constant suffering and pain, and a politicality this pathetic, absurd state in which what characterizes Berenger's world that successfully enables him to keep away from the herd and join the ranks of these mass ideological movements. His constant suffering and pain remind him of his existence as a human being and light up a burning desire to express his individuality and help him not to succumb to the ongoing mass hysteria. Now, the ending of the play brings the impression of aliens encircling Berenger, but the protagonist still has got a lot more space, nearly the entire stage to himself, a stage which exhibits the protesting character in all his earned glory. Okay, the stage is exhibiting the struggle and resistance against the conformist and totalitarian ideologies which were present within the contemporary society. Now, we took too much time on the political aspect of the play, so this is definitely going to be a long video. Now, let's come back to the theater of absurd or absurdism. Now, the theater of absurd is a term that refers to a group of plays written mostly by French authors in the late 1940s to 60s, as well as the genre of theater that arose from their work. To convey the apparent absurdity of human existence, these works typically employ illogical situations, strange dialogue, short narratives, etc. In 1961, after a critical analysis of various contemporary dramatists, notably Irish born writer Samuel Beckett and French playwrights Eugene Ionesco, John Janet, and Arthur Adamov, British professor Martin Aslin coined the phrase the theatre of the absurd. The work of these playwrights, according to Esselin, gives creative expression to Albert Camus' concept that life is essentially meaningless, as depicted in his work The Myth of Sisyphus. Dadaism, nonsense poetry, and avant garde art of the 1910s and 1920s are believed to have influenced the theater of absurd. Eugene Ionesco created and produced Rhinoceros that uses the absurd to testify to its wonders. By describing the inexplicable, he attempted to unveil the personal reality. It is often regarded as one of his most social and political play. In its depiction of the fight of an authentic individual versus the group, it is the representation of existentialism. In both comedic and tragic modes of experience, UNESCO wanted to depict the beautiful, ludicrous, and awful parts of personalized human life. He succeeded in revealing these features in this play by demonstrating how language, cultural traditions, political conformism, and intellectual idealization trap people. What begins as a comical phenomenon of men turning into rhinoceros in UNESCO's Rhinoceros grows uncomfortable, even terrifying, as every character, except one, transforms into a dangerous animal. Or the audience remains in the atmosphere of the or grieving in traditional comedies of tragedies. Rhinoceros, on the other hand, leaves the audience somewhere in the middle, more aware of life's odd complexity but unsure of what to do or think about it. The play is absurd in many ways, not only because it is because of its assertion. Characters makes wildly irrational arguments that to anyone watching or reading do not hold up under investigation. The play makes the notion that life in general is ludicrous and unexplainable rather than something that can be clearly examined. Through these weird events that occur and the characters attempt to make sense of them. Furthermore, the aspects of human cognition that are supposed to make sense of the world's mysteries, such as logic, intellectualism, and language, are as absurd as the mysteries they are supposed to explain. One of the most notable characteristics of absurdism is that a play must feature themes or dialogues that are repetitive or make no sense to be labeled an absurd play. For example, in Act 1, Scene 1, of the characters keep repeating the phrase, "Oh, a rhinoceros," mindlessly, because the characters' reactions were outrageous and silly. This section of the play is a clear example of absurd dialogue. They were more interested in debating and disputing over whether they were two rhinos or whether the rhino was from Asia or Africa than being afraid and concerned about what had just transpired. By disregarding the literal use of language, UNESCO systematically plays on the double meanings and the mismatch of the proper and figurative. Beranger concedes absurdity from the outset. He says that life is a dream, alluding to the inexplicable randomness around him. This allows him to understand the absurdity of the metamorphosis better. Even though he is unable to reach a logical conclusion, the playwright is again implying how the world is nonsensical, absurd, and defies the extent of logic. Now, another characteristic of absurdism employed by UNESCO is the irrationality of the characters. For example, the character of logician. For someone who has the word logic in his name, he is utterly illogical and absurd. We can see him explaining the syllogism to the other characters in the first act of the play. The readers or audience can very clearly note that the irrationality of the logician, but the other characters and the logician himself can't. This implies not only that Rhinoceros's world and more generally the audience's is fundamentally absurd, but also that any attempts to make sense of it are irrational, inconclusive, and easily tampered with. The play pokes fun at intellectualism overall through the figure of John, Berenger's best friend, in addition to the absurdity of reasoning. Despite John's claim that he is superior to Berenger because he is more intelligent and cultured, he succumbed to rhinoceritis and even tries to run down his friend on his way on the street to join the stampeding rhinoceroses. Even John's intellectualism failed to save him, and Berenger's attempts to critically examine and make sense of his circumstances were similarly futile. Berenger, the play's final human, comes to the conclusion that language is worthless in and of itself. Beranger's eventual inability to make sense of anything, including his own capacity to join the rhinoceroses, shows that while it is natural to strive to make sense of the world through logic or rationality, this is ultimately pointless because the world is intrinsically irrational and meaningless. Though it might seem hardly absurd on surface levels, UNESCO's plot is the beginning of its distortion of the typical theatrical conventions. The plot never leads to a traditional climax or resolution. Effects are not the result of any given cause. Rational thinking is thrown out. The circular quality is also shown throughout the characters who not only verbally repeat themselves but also find no developmental change from the beginning to the end. Now, when we are on the topic, we also have to acknowledge the term rhinoceritis. Okay, so rhinoceritis is a disease. Rhinoceros is a disease. The play depicts rhinoceritis, that is, the transformation into a rhinoceros, as a disease. Even when everyone but Beranger becomes a rhinoceros, there is no doubt for the audience that rhinoceritis is a dangerous disease. The spread of rhinoceritis in the play becomes an allegory for the spread of totalitarianism in a society. As the play moves from a public to a private space, we see the spread of rhinoceritis also from an object of curious observation to an individual decision to turn into a rhinoceros. This movement of the disease from the public to private space comments on how totalitarian ideologies gain traction as they start entering private spaces until most, if not all, fall prey to it. There is no logic behind the arrival and the spread of rhinoceritis. The lack of logic is first shown throughout the faulty syllogisms of the logician, according to which a dog must be a cat. Furthermore, the lack of logic is emphasized when instead of offering a solution of the conundrum about the nature of the rhinoceros, the logician merely restates the doubts and theories of the people so that the problem is correctly posed. As a result, it is hardly a surprise when we later find out that the logician too has turned into a rhinoceros. Um, Later in the play, Berenger comments that if only it had happened somewhere else in some other country and we did just read about it in the papers, one could discuss it quietly, examine the question from all points of view, and come to an objective conclusion. We could organize debates with professors and writers and lawyers and blues stockings and artists and people and the ordinary man in the street as well. It would be very interesting and instructive. But when you are involved yourself up against the brutal facts, you can't help feeling directly concerned. The shock is too violent for you to stay cool and detached. This reflects how a society that is in the grip of a major ideological shift often fails to be objective or logical about it, too swept in the undercurrent. This explains why the noise made by the rhinoceros seems melodic to people right before they transform, for it symbolizes the breakdown of communication and their growing distance from humanity. So, as the play progresses, more and more people start turning into rhinoceros. From the rhinoceros that we see in the first act to realizing that the rhinoceros in Act 2, Scene 1, used to be someone that the characters knew, the transformations increasingly starts affecting the characters. John's transformation is arguably the most vital transformation. It is arguably the no, not only because this is the first on stage transformation, but also because in Act 1, John has been lecturing Berenger about the etiquettes of being a civilized man. However, given that John seemed to determine what is acceptable and appropriate based on what the masses deem to be so, it is not so surprising that John transforms when the masses too start transforming. Nevertheless, John's transformation has a deep effect on the audience. He goes from becoming a human into a rhinoceros, losing everything that made his John. Ionesco wrote in 1940s about people transforming in favor of the fascist regime. I have been present at mutations. I have seen people transformed almost beneath my eyes. It is as if I had come across the very process of metamorphosis, as if I had been present at it. I felt them becoming more and more stranger. I felt them withdrawing little by little. I felt how another soul, another mind germinated in them. They lost their personality and it was replaced by another. They became another. These sentiments are reflected first in John's transformation and later in Dudat and Daisy's transformations as well. Now, in the end, parental is the only human left. We have already discussed that very well in before. Now, because this video is taking too long, I'm not discussing kitsch. It's one of the most important topics that you cannot miss, but because it will take some time to explain this specific topic, it would need to be another video. But do let me know if you want another video on the topic of kitsch. I would be more than willing to do that. Anyway, if you like the video, please subscribe, comment what topic do you want next. And thank you so much for joining me in this rambling. Thank you.